This video is sponsored by Incogni. You may have heard in the news of data breaches against major companies you may have online accounts with. The risk of your data being leaked online is growing. Data brokers then sell your personal information on online marketplaces, including names and aliases, login credentials, location history, online activity, and more. This is often the source of robot phone calls and mail targeted at you personally, and brokers will even sell information about you to potential recruitment advisors for the job you applied for. Large loans have been taken out under people's names without them ever knowing about it, using their information. Incogni reaches out to brokers and requests the removal of your personal data, and then ensures your data stays off the market. While it wouldn't be efficient for you to approach hundreds of data brokers individually, Incogni has developed an automated service to do this for you. The first 100 people to use code IntelReport at the link below will get 60% off of Incogni. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't wish to proceed, so there's no risk to trying it out today. Star of the Top Gun films, an icon of the Cold War, the Grumman F-14 Tomcat is one of the most recognisable and well-known aircraft of all time. With 32 years of service, the F-14 Tomcat unquestionably made a legacy for itself. Beginning its service in 1975 in the last moments of the Vietnam War, it would appear in the skies over Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Grenada, Iraq, the Balkans and Afghanistan. Its appearance in the 1986 classic Top Gun would see the US Navy recruitment statistics soar by 500% in the year following the film's release. The Tomcat was a supersonic, twin-seat, twin-engine, variable sweep-wing, carrier-based fighter, capable of Mach 2.34, a combat range of 500 nautical miles, a ceiling of over 50,000 feet, and a climb rate of over 30,000 feet per minute. Tied with its impressive performance, the Tomcat carried a hefty payload. The earliest variant, the F-14A, maintained 10 hardpoints, 6 under the fuselage, 2 under the nacelles, and 2 on the wing gloves. The Tomcat could carry a Vulcan 6-barreled rotary cannon and a consortium of air-to-air missiles including AIM-54C Phoenix, AIM-9L Sidewinder, and AIM-7F Sparrow. Provisions were also made for the AIM-120A AMRAAM. Later variants of the Tomcat, the F-14D, would expand the fixable ordnance, allowing JDAM and Paveway guided munitions, Mark 80 unguided general-purpose munitions, Mark 20 Rockeye cluster munitions, and Zuni rocket pods to be equipped for ground attack scenarios. Such a spread of ordnance allowed the F-14 to fulfill several roles, including combat air patrols, the suppression of enemy air defense, strike support, tactical air reconnaissance, and fleet air defense. Its production line would run from 1969 until 1992, with 710 airframes produced. Of this, 632 would enter service with the US Navy. The remaining airframes were shipped to the Imperial State of Iran before the deposition of the Shah during the 1979 revolution. In the 1950s, advances in Soviet long-range maritime and bomber aircraft necessitated a requirement for the US Navy to procure a fleet defense fighter that could engage high-altitude bombers from well beyond visual range. In 1961, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara directed the Navy to join the US Air Force in participating in the Tactical Fighter Experimental Program, hoping for a cost-effective solution which would meet the requirements of both branches. The program immediately saw disagreements between the two, where the Air Force sought a tandem-seat aircraft for low-level penetration. The Navy pursued a shorter, high-altitude interceptor. What resulted was the F-111B carrier-borne aircraft, designed in parallel with what would become known as the F-111 Aardvark. The final nail in the project's coffin was delivered by Admiral Thomas Connolly, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Air Warfare, when in 1968 he flew the developmental F-111B and testified his concerns before Congress. Later that year, Congress ceased funding the F-111B, allowing the Navy to pursue a tailor-made aircraft. Grumman continued to refine a series of proposals, leading to the Grumman 303. And with the Navy's decisional autonomy, a new program was born, Naval Fighter Experimental. Through 1968, several companies bid for the project, including McDonnell Douglas, yet the Grumman 303 bid would win in January 1969. Soon after, the F-14 would be born, powered by two Pratt & Whitney TF-30 P412A engines, capable of producing 40,000 pounds of thrust. The F-14 first took flight on December 21, 1970, reaching initial operating capability in 1973. At the time, the largest and heaviest fighter to take off from an aircraft carrier. Later variants of the F-14 would see the introduction of the TARP's Recon camera pod. Engine upgrades were provided to B and D variants in the form of twin General Electric F110 GE400, producing a combined 54,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner. Improvements continued well into the 1990s and 2000s. Following the retirement of the Grumman A6 Intruder, the F-14 air-to-ground program was resurrected, and with the addition of the Lantern system, the F-14 was cleared to deploy laser-guided and precision-guided munitions. The name, Tomcat, followed a Grumman tradition of giving their aircraft feline names, such as the Wildcat, Bearcat, and Panther. The Tom is seen to pay tribute to Admiral Thomas Connolly for having played a pivotal role in the programme. When the Tomcat entered into operational service in September 1974, its initial reception was mixed. As Steve Hose-Huzak said, "God, we had a terrible time with those first jets. They were like lemon cars, electrical gremlins, engines that routinely exploded or burned up. You were lucky to fly 3 hours a month." Conversely, Brian Line Rat Hegrat would display mixed emotions. "It was a constant challenge, but the rewards could bring tears to your eyes. Along the way, I uttered every cuss word known to man. I may have even invented a few. But let some non-Tomcat sailors say a disparaging word about my jet, and I'd rip them to pieces." The Tomcat's first operational tour came in April 1975 as part of Operation Frequent Wind, the final phase in the American evacuation from Saigon. Tomcats from squadrons VF-1 and VF-2 aboard USS Enterprise flew air superiority missions above Saigon to dissuade the North Vietnamese from interfering. A year later, in April 1976, the F-14 would undertake the first of its most routine tasking, that of fleet air defense, which saw F-14s intercept aircraft as they approached within a certain distance of a US carrier. This included the Soviet Tu-95 Bear strategic and maritime bombers, and the Ilyushin IL-38 maritime reconnaissance aircraft. In the same year over Lebanon, F-14s would provide air superiority for Operation Fluid Drive, the American evacuation of foreign nationals from Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. Only 6 years later, the F-14 would return as part of the multinational peacekeeping force until 1984. Here, F-14s equipped with TARP's recon pods identified artillery batteries based in the Bekaa Valley to provide targeting information for offshore fire support from the 4 carrier battle groups. On the 3rd of December 1983, during the Lebanese Civil War, 2 Tomcats from VF-31 aboard USS John F. Kennedy came under fire from Syrian surface-to-air missile sites. Some 10 missiles were launched against the Tomcats, yet neither was struck. The following day, the F-14s returned, this time providing an escort for a retaliatory strike. Having not learnt their lesson, Syrian SAM sites continued to lock onto and fire at Tomcats. 10 days later, the battleship USS New Jersey silenced several sites with naval gunfire. This, however, was not the first time an F-14 Tomcat had encountered Soviet-made surface-to-air missiles. In April 1983, 2 F-14As from VF-102 aboard USS America, conducting aerial recon missions over Somalia, were mistakenly and unsuccessfully engaged by Somali SA-2s. Most famously, an inspiration for the first Top Gun film was the F-14's role during operations against Muammar Gaddafi's Libya over the Gulf of Sidra between 1980 and 1989. Over these 9 years, F-14s would shoot down 4 Libyan aircraft in 2 aerial engagements, the US Navy F-14's only air-to-air kills against enemy fighters. On the 19th of August 1981, 2 Libyan Su-22 fighters engaged a pair of F-14As from VF-41 aboard the USS Nimitz, conducting freedom of navigation operations. The pair of Su-22s launched an atoll missile which failed to hit either of the F-14s. With the Libyan aircraft engaging first, the F-14s shot down both Libyan Su-22s with their Sidewinder missiles. 8 years later, on the 4th of January 1989, two F-14As from VF-32 aboard the USS John F. Kennedy also conducted freedom of navigation operations near the Gulf of Sidra. This time they were joined by two MiG-23s. As the MiGs appeared to position themselves to engage, the Tomcats, not allowing the MiGs the chance to fire first, engaged. Shortly after, both MiGs had been shot down by Sparrow and Sidewinder missiles. On the 2nd of August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and fears arose that it may continue to advance into Saudi Arabia. 5 days later, Operation Desert Shield began. Two battle groups led by the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and the USS Independence, with 4 F-14 squadrons between them, responded immediately, providing air cover over Saudi Arabia until coalition air forces could arrive in theatre. On the 17th of January 1991, Desert Shield transitioned to Operation Desert Storm, and the F-14's role changed. Some 10 squadrons performed strike support, combat air patrol, suppression of enemy air defence, fleet air defence, and tactical air reconnaissance operations. More often than not, coalition forces would specifically request escorts by Tomcats because Iraqi fighters would disengage and flee. On day 1 of Operation Desert Storm, 2 Iraqi MiG-21s attempted to escape 4 F-14s from VF-103. In their escape, they flew directly into the path of a further 4 FA-18 Hornets, which promptly shot them down. Similar instances occurred throughout the war. The final air-to-air kill achieved by an F-14 came on February 6, 1991, when a pair of F-14s from VF-1 of the USS Ranger engaged an Iraqi Mi-8 helicopter with Sidewinder missiles. In all, 4,124 sorties were flown by the 99 F-14s in theatre. Operation Desert Storm would also see the only F-14 lost to hostile fire in US service. On the 21st of January 1991, Devon Jones and Lawrence Slade of VF-103 were conducting an escort mission over Al-Assad Air Base when an SA-2 guideline struck their F-14. Both escaped the aircraft, yet Slade would become a prisoner of war until the 4th of March 1991. From 1991 to 2003, F-14s patrolled established no-fly zones over Iraq in operations Provide Comfort, Southern Watch and Northern Watch, as well as operational use during Operation Desert Fox. These no-fly zones remained in place until the 2003 invasion of Iraq. This period would mark several firsts for the Tomcat, including the first use of Paveway 3 munitions by the Navy. In mid-September of 2001, the USS Enterprise with CVW-8 was the first aircraft carrier to arrive off the Pakistani coast, joined shortly by USS Vinson and CVW-11. Both carrier groups deployed Tomcats and Prowlers across Afghanistan, where they conducted recon missions. To circumvent fuel limitations, CVW-8's VS-31 operating S-3 Vikings was the only available squadron capable of providing aerial refueling. And so, the Viking anti-submarine aircraft would drag F-14s as near to Afghanistan as they could before releasing them to conduct their operations. Replacement Vikings would then remain on standby until the F-14s had completed their missions, allowing them to refuel and return to the carrier. Hornets, Prowlers, Vikings and Hawkeyes joined Tomcats to conduct small strike missions against strategic targets. When Operation Enduring Freedom began on the 7th of October 2001, F-14s from VF-213 aboard USS Vinson would be the first to strike under Commander Chip King. They were joined by 15 strategic bombers and 50 Tomahawk missiles from Royal Navy and US Navy vessels, obliterating targets across Afghanistan. In all, 9 F-14 squadrons would take part in Operation Enduring Freedom, playing a significant strike role. It is estimated that the 9 squadrons dropped over £1.5 million of munitions, with VF-102 dropping the most bombs and logging more combat hours than any other F-14 unit. 3 years later, F-14s would once again play a pivotal role in the skies over Iraq, this time as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. 9 F-14 squadrons flew 2,547 sorties, dropping over 1,452 bombs of several types on targets such as the Iraqi Ministry of Information and Saddam Hussein's personal yacht. Operation Iraqi Freedom, however, would also see the F-14 take part in the worst friendly fire incident of the war, where, on the 6th of April 2003, a Tomcat, having been granted authorization to destroy an Iraqi tank southeast of Mosul, mistakenly dropped a single 2,000-pound bomb on a vehicle convoy, which led to the deaths of 18 Kurdish fighters, 4 US soldiers, and a BBC translator. Nonetheless, the F-14 continued to fulfill its duties until its final combat mission on the 8th of February 2006, when Tomcats from VF-31 aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt completed a strike mission over Iraq. After this, the official retirement ceremony was held on the 22nd of September 2006, marking the end of over 32 years of illustrious service. The Tomcat's replacement had been mulled over since the 1970s. After all, it was the most expensive fighter of its time. With the Marine Corps and Navy needing a replacement for their aging F-4s and A-7s, the VFAX program was directed to review the lightweight fighter competition, leading to the development of the FA-18 Hornet. In 1994, proposals to modernize the F-14 beyond the D variant were rejected by Congress, so the FA-18 Super Hornet entered service in 2001. In all, the US Navy Tomcats scored 5 air-to-air kills, in return for 1 loss at the hands of enemy fire. Some 150 Tomcats were lost to a variety of mechanical and technological issues. Outside of the US Navy, 79 Tomcats and 274 Phoenix missiles were delivered to the Imperial State of Iran before the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Following the revolution, the US imposed an arms embargo on Iran, forcing them to cannibalize several airframes to ensure some F-14s remained operational. Shortly after the revolution, in September 1980, Iraq declared war on Iran. Despite the lack of trained aircrews, Iran was able to field 60 F-14s, which would fulfill a range of roles including combat air patrols and strike escorts. There is limited information concerning the performance of Iranian F-14s. However, it is believed that 6 years into the war, in 1986, 30 of the 60 remained operational. Some sources suggest that Iranian F-14s downed 160 Iraqi aircraft. One F-14 pilot, Jalil Zandi, would become the highest ever scoring F-14 pilot. He would claim shooting down 11 enemy aircraft, 8 of which have been confirmed by US intelligence. These included 2 MiG-21s, 4 MiG-23s, 2 Su-22s and 3 Mirage F-1s. Iraq would claim that it shot down over 70 of Iran's F-14s, however likely estimates suggest a figure between 12 and 16 versus the claimed 160 Iraqi jets shot down in return. Since the Iran-Iraq War, the number of Iranian F-14s has continued to drop as a result of defections, cannibalization or crashes. By 2009, it was estimated that Iran maintained between 40 and 50 airframes, of which half were suspected to be operational. As the years have gone on, this can only be assumed to have continued to drop, as Iran cannot manufacture some of the F-14's core components. In total, somewhere between 30 and 40 F-14s have been lost to enemy fire in its 32 years of service. When measuring this against the vast array of deployments from Vietnam to Iraq, the F-14 has faced a variety of both airborne and land-based adversaries, overcoming them all. Without question, the Grumman F-14 Tomcat solidified itself as one of the greatest Cold War aircraft.